Welcome to Embracing God's Love. We're here with ministry founder Pat Beyer, and she's a treasured friend of mine. What I think about when I think about you is that you're a sign and a wonder. I've said it before, but when you get to know someone and know their story so deeply that you see Jesus moving powerfully and doing miracles that you never thought you would see in someone's lifetime, it just increases your faith. And so, as a friend, I love you because you provoke my heart to believe. You challenge me to say, and then there's God. And I can't tell you how many times I've just cried with Pat, pouring out my heart about my own little young life. And because of your wisdom and your experience and your time with Jesus, you're able to say, it's going to be okay because God is there. And you have the rest of the picture where I'm in the middle of the story. So I get excited for the listeners because they get to witness what I witnessed, which is the transformation that Jesus can do with what seems to be hopeless, but in his eyes is something so wonderful that he cannot wait to just show it off for the glory of his son. And today we're going to just chat about your early life, because you've had a life rich in Jesus coming to your rescue, rewriting your story. And I would love to know how God has created like a path of freedom out of a story of pain. But first we're going to pray. Okay. So Jesus, we love you. And we invite you, Jesus, to pull up a chair and be a part of this conversation, because everything that you've done for Pat has made her just a shining beacon of hope. And we invite you to come and tell your story along with Pat telling her story. And we ask that you bless the listeners and stir up their hearts to have courage and faith, knowing that you have good and beautiful things on the other side. Amen. Mm-hmm. So today we're going to talk about mom and dad and what that was like for you. Okay. Now, my friend Pat is 80 years old. So things were very different in her childhood than it is in 2024. Yeah. And so go ahead and just say like what your early life was like.
Oh, well, I have a brother and a sister. Mm-hmm. My mom and dad were divorced when I was just 2, I think. I don't even remember it. I don't know. My mom was a very hard worker and really did everything she could as to working extra jobs or anything in order to keep at that point it was just my sister and I. And my sister's 3 years older than I am, and her name is Betty. And so when I was little, I don't remember my dad at all. So all my life I basically didn't care who he was or whatever, because he was never around. And so I didn't have any relationship with him, and I really didn't have a connection with my mom because she was always busy, and she was always working, yeah. And she was disconnected herself. So I felt I was raised having to work things out on my own. And but as a little girl, one of the things I did was I just loved to run away from home when my mother made me mad. And I would run away and go to my grandma's house, which was miles and miles away, and I would walk there. Wow. And this was at the age of maybe 4. And the other thing I would do is when I got upset, I would go down to a lake that was about a block from our house, and I would go and just sit there all by myself. And so that I was considered at that point a runaway kid, because I was always running away. And my safe haven was my grandmother. She was a very godly woman. She was the one in the family that loved me unconditionally. She was always there, no matter what I did. She was there to just hold me and let me sit on her lap. So I realized as I got older and learned about Jesus, more about Jesus, I realized my grandmother was kind of my first Jesus, you know, as far as an example of love and being there. So my dad came over and he went down the hall, and I'm in the living room, and I can't even remember who was with me.
About how old were you?
Well, it had to be around 2. I mean,
Yeah,
because
earliest memory.
earliest memory was probably around 2. And so he came over and went down the hall, and I heard a gunshot. And so I didn't have a clue of if both of them were hurt, if my mother was shot, if my dad was shot. And then all of a sudden he comes out, and my mom's okay, but there was a bullet hole in the ceiling until the day we sold the house. Yeah. And so that's where the shot was. But for me, that was just, I mean, I can't tell you yet too what I felt. I just remember the memory and the fear I had of who was shot. So that was the main memory I had of my dad, of whatever that trauma was that created. And then that night, my mom had also bought a car to get to work. And that night he ripped all the wires out of the car. And so anyway, I decided I didn't want to have anything to do with him just at a young age. But the bottom line is he never wanted to have anything to do with me. And but my sister, he was very, very close to my sister. And my sister loved him. And so our tradition on Friday would be that my sister and I would walk to the bus stop, and then my sister would get on the bus and go to see my dad and his family, and I would get on the bus to go see my grandmother because she was the only one that really was safe for me. And so at a very young age, I never felt my dad accepted or loved me or wanted me. So my little mind at a little age said, well, that my protection is I'm not going to care if you love me. And so that's basically how I would, you know, my sister loved him, loved going over there, and I didn't. And then later on, I did find out that he didn't want me over there. And what I was really feeling was not wanted, and it was a truth. And so I was raised really with this emptiness in my heart, and I don't, you know, I never knew what it was. I just always thought what I did with all of that is I was a very, well, if I went according to the family, I was uncontrollable. I was a brat. I was totally out of control all the time. Anyway, basically, I had a label on me that I was a bad girl, and I lived that out. I lived out what they said. I mean, I never could get satisfied in anything, and I was just always unhappy. But you would not know it on the outside. It was all on the inside. But what I realized is it was coming out on the outside with my behaviors. And so that's where I was with, you know, as a child. And then I grew up. Where am I supposed to be?
There's a lot of significance in you having like zero nurturing. Like there was no encouragement in your family system. No. You literally were a little girl just on your own and with a starving heart. When your identity was being formed, did you just completely and totally believe what your family said about you, or did you have your own ideas about?
Well, I think what they said about me, I lived out, and but I really realize now, I definitely felt I was no good. I couldn't do anything. My automatic thing was I couldn't do anything. I had, I was, I am ADD, and but back then, you know, they didn't know what that was. But you know, I did live out just being out of control, and so, so I felt I couldn't do anything. I had dyslexia, and so I got teased a lot because I couldn't read. And so then I decided I was dumb and stupid, and I hated school because it was hard and nobody understood. Nowadays they would, but back then they didn't pick up that I had a learning problem. I really had a learning problem. And so that formed another identity with me is, being stupid, can't do anything. The last thing I would do was grab a book and read it. Are you kidding? And because I couldn't read.
Right.
So what the voice was that you're stupid. And that's how I lived, is feeling I was stupid. I felt I wasn't good enough all the time. It was just I couldn't do anything right. And so I lived that out. That was my own personal thing that would automatically come to me was you can't do it, and you're not going to do it right. You're a failure. And so I lived out being a failure at that point in my life.
Yeah, someone wise once said that your mother's voice becomes the child's inner voice.
Yeah.
And I can see how you were just internalizing all of the things that people said and what your mom said. Did your mom ever defend you when people were being so unkind?
No.
Wow.
My grandmother did.
Yeah.
My grandmother would always be my defender. And I can remember one time I ran away, and my uncle would get so mad because my uncle was still at home. And my uncle would get so mad because I kept doing this. And it was dangerous. I mean, it was miles to my grandmother's house. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I'd go over there barefooted. So one of the stories I remember is I went over there, and he kept saying every time I do it, she just needs the heck beat out of her. Oh, that's not what the word was, but right. So one day he did whip me with a shoe, which nobody whipped me. So I wasn't, my abuse was not a physical abuse. My abuse was words. Yeah. And the words would always say, you're a failure, you're bad, you're not enough. Those would be words that no matter what was coming up. And I realize now they control my whole life. Until I learned they didn't have to control my life. Mm-hmm. So anyway, and then another funny story when I was little was my grandmother, you knew you were going to church on Sunday, and that was all there was to it. And so my aunt lived with my grandmother, and so she dresses me up in her clothes. Now, I'm a little bitty girl, and she rolls this skirt up. And I mean, I looked like a clown, and I was so embarrassed. And, but I was in church and I was fully clothed. The shoes might have been a little big. So things like that would really make my uncle mad, is that, I'd do this stupid stuff, and it seemed to happen a lot on the weekend. But anyway, so that was another funny thing that we can still laugh at.
It's really challenging in sibling relationships where you're raised in the same home, but you can have a completely different experience with your parents, completely different memories. So how did that impact your relationship with your sister?
Well, my sister was totally different. They told me my grandfather told my mom, because my sister was this little angel baby. And so they told my mom that if she ever had another one, it would never be the same. And that came about because then when I came, she was made A's in school. She was just the perfect little kid. And then they said I was trying to get out of the baby bed when I was 4 months old. And so I said, well, there you go. At 4 months old, I was trying to get away. So I was just totally different than what she was. And so there was just a lot of conflict just over that, just the fact that we were totally different.
Yeah.
We're still totally different, but now we do work at it and understand each other. But back then, no. I called her I was a tomboy, and she hated it. Hated I was a tomboy. And she hated me to call her sister, and I'd get up on the roof as a tomboy, and then I'd yell back down at her and say, "Sister, sister," and she'd get so mad. I don't even know if she remembers all those stories, but she gets so mad. "Don't call me sister."
So your sister was receiving praise from your family.
Yes.
Because at first I was
Yes.
like, maybe they just aren't capable of
Yeah.
encouraging their children. But now
Yeah.
I'm hearing your sister was approved of. She
Yeah.
was applauded, whereas you were compared to her
Yeah.
and constantly put down.
Right.
That's a really hard contrast to live with.
Yeah, and particularly the put downs came from my dad's side. But my mom, you know, as I go into deeper in my story, you know, I can realize now why my mom wasn't even capable of giving me what I wanted because of the situation. So yeah, and then another story that I remember is when I was 5. My mom and I don't know, Studer's opened. I don't know, nobody is probably even knows what Studer's is at this stage because we don't have any more. But back then they were opening and they were having deals, and so my mom decided to take me to get my picture taken. And number one, I had on this beautiful dress, and we didn't have money for clothes, so I'm not too sure where I got the dress. But I had this beautiful dress, and then she decided to take my hair and curl it, which it was very straight. And so every curl had pins. I must have had 100 pins in my hair, but I looked beautiful. And so we go there, and I'm not wanting to smile or anything. So my mom pulls me out of the room and swats me one, which was unusual, and says, well, you need to go in there and you need to smile and you need to behave yourself. And so I go in there and I smile and I look beautiful. And then we get home and I have fever. My grandmother realizes I have fever, and then they find out I had the measles.
Oh my goodness.
And so I was sick.
Ah.
But the picture turned out awesome. And Studer says, "Oh, it's such a good picture. Can we hang it on all the walls to our studios?" And my mom says yes. He said, "We'll give you a big one of her free." Perfect, because we didn't have any money. And so, should I show the picture?
Yes.
Okay. So
Let's see those curls.
There you go. See, isn't that dress the cutest thing? Yeah, and those curls. Yeah. Can you see it?
Perfect.
Yeah. And so, yeah. Well, this picture, as cute as she is, hung on my mom's front door. And every time somebody would go by it, they would say, "Oh, she is so beautiful, but she is such a brat." Or, "Oh, if we could just get her in control." Or, "Oh, she's just impossible." And so I lived with those words.
Yeah.
And these were people that loved me, but they said they said one thing: "She's beautiful." So when I have a compliment on my appearance, I cringe because I don't know what to do with it, because that equals to me bad. So in my adult life, I've had to work on that, because I never understood why I'd cringe if somebody made a compliment on me. But that was why, because they always put that first, and then behind it was the bad. So she's cute. She had the measles. This is a fake smile and fake hair. But there you go. That's how I live my life.
So your little girl life was being formed of like portraying an image that everything's okay, but inside your heart was just starving for someone to accept you and to love you and to encourage you.
Yes.
So what did that do for your identity growing up as a child? Did you believe them when they said you were a brat? When
Absolutely. I mean, the problem is when we get titles or labels, then we live them. And so I lived my life looking bad. I mean, I was out of control And if anybody has been around it, somebody has ADD, you want to control them, but you can't. And so I lived that way, and all the way through school with all the teasing of, I hated school because I knew when I got there and they asked me to read, I was going to end up going into shame and not being able to read. And then when I did have to read, hear people correcting me in the back and laughing. So I was always scared to death to read or to be in a setting. Even as I grew up, even in a Bible study, I would be feeling that shame, afraid they might ask me to read or whatever. And I can say up until the last 2 years, I have been able to get free from that belief system. And it has been so freeing. And I didn't even know it was something I could get freed from. And I did not ever, always would ask God, could you just help me to read? And so I was expecting him to fix the reading problem. And instead of that, what he's done is he's removed the shame from the reading problem. And so I still have a problem with reading out loud, but don't have that shield around me of shame.
Yeah, you don't have that label, that lie anymore.
Yeah.
So throughout your process of letting Jesus remove the wrong labels, what has he replaced those with?
Well, after I came to know the Lord, which I was 28 then, when I accepted him, I didn't understand what happened at all. But as I've gotten older and grew in the Lord, he's taught me that I can replace all of those lies that I have been learning about myself with his love and with what he thinks about me. And he didn't think at all that way. And it's just been so freeing to realize that I wasn't a bad girl. And it's very touching, even in getting ready for this, that God would even let me do this. But it's because I'm no longer who I said I was. And I'm going to say they said, but then I lived it because that's what I believed about myself. And now God has replaced it with what he sees me as. And I can now receive the word beautiful or isn't she pretty or whatever. I can receive that as that's what he thinks about me, not what their bottom line is about me.
Right.
Yeah.
What I found so exciting about your story is that later on, when you've known Jesus and you're whole and you're healed, suddenly the Lord gives you all of these siblings you never knew you had. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I never understood why my dad didn't want me or, love me or what was really going on. But when I was in my 50s or late 40s or whatever, I found out my dad was dying. And I did go up and I actually forgave him and I had a talk with him. And so, but then later I got this call and they said he was dying and they needed to have the family come up to the hospital. And I knew that he had been married 8 times. I knew I had 8 to 10 siblings that I didn't know. So I knew they were existed, but what I didn't know, I get this call and it's from this girl, and she says, "Well, I want to come to town to see Dad." Actually, let me back up. Actually, we got this call and Perry answered the phone, and we were having a prayer meeting because we were fixing to have a retreat with some singles. And so he said, "Well, I'll have her call you back." And she said, "Well, I'm her stepmom, so and so." And so after it was all over, he said, he told me, and I said, well, I don't know who that is. I know all the names of all the other wives, but I don't know this one. And so I called my sister and I said, so who is this one? And she said, that's the one that when Mom was pregnant, Dad got another woman pregnant and married her. And, she's 5 months younger than you. And I'm going, no, I don't know. I don't know. Everybody knew, but I don't know. So anyway, so it ended up I had a sister 5 months younger than me that I knew nothing about. And so that explained why my dad didn't want to have anything to do with me, because he blamed it all on my mom. And it's all my mom's fault that he was married to 2 women at one time. And so all of a sudden it was like God took the story, and it was always this puzzle in my life that I couldn't figure out. Why this and why that? And it was like all of a sudden just hearing that story, it was like that's the center of what my battle was inside. Really came probably from birth, our wounds or whatever that were in there that.
Yeah, it answered your question. Why did he abandon me? Why did he reject me?
Well, he couldn't, because then he'd have to live in shame. And so he just didn't have anything to do with me, but had something to do with my sister. And so anyway, that put a lot of pieces to the puzzle. And then it was really interesting, because then I did get a call that my dad was dying, and they said, well, you need to get a hold of your siblings. And I'm thinking, I don't even know where I would get a hold of them. And the doctor says, well, honey, sometimes you need to forgive. And I'm thinking, this is not about forgiveness. This is truth. I don't know how to get a hold of them. So I called my sister and I said, all right, we're supposed to be at the hospital tomorrow to meet with the doctors, because with Dad. And I'm thinking, why did they call me? I'm the one that he's had nothing to do with. Why did they call me? And so, and I was really mad over that. It was like, call the ones that he talks to. And anyway, so the next day we're going to the hospital. We're thinking, we don't know where the siblings are, so that there's only going to be us. And so, and I was mad that us was having to go. Yeah. So we get off the elevator and we turn the corner, and my sister says to the nurse, we're here for the, Mr. Mayer. Oh, well, just go around the corner, and the other sisters and brothers are there. And I'm going, you gotta be. I just looked at my sister and I said, you gotta be kidding. And I was just enraged. And then I went around the corner, and all of a sudden God flashed to me what man meant for evil, God means for good. And it was like it took all of the anger away. And I was able to go, okay, God, you have a plan, even though I don't understand it and I don't even like it. But anyway, and so then, so I meet my new sister, but we're all sitting there in a row, and everybody was there, I think, but one. And we're sitting there in a row. The doctor's over there, and I'm going, now, I'm the one, the outgoing one. I'm not, nobody else, everybody's being nice. And I'm going, so what mother do you come from? So what mother do you come from? Because that would be the only way I knew who they were. So, and I didn't know who they were. And so anyway, that was our introduction to each other. And I always feared the day that would come. And it ended up, God's grace was so on us. And I don't even think at that point I fully understood how God's grace could do that. But it was like we were connected. The doctors were laughing because I was doing this, number one. And number two, they were laughing. They said, y'all all have the same chin, or, whatever. And, or y'all two look exactly alike, and y'all two look exactly alike. And it was really funny, because when we sat there, my sister was here, and then this other sister was here, and then I was here. Well, this other sister looked like me, acted like me, was out of control like me. And we were like this, in front of my sister.
Betty in the middle.
It's like, how did I get with the two bad ones? because stuff like that she hated. So anyway, but we made it. So then the crazy thing was in this, the girl wanted to know where she could stay, what would be a close hotel. And I mean, I'm thinking, I said, well, just come stay with us. Oh my gosh. I thought, what did you just do? But she did stay with us, and we had an awesome time and got very close. And then the very last day, right before my dad's funeral, she says to me, we're talking, and we're talking about, our childhood, because um, reason her mother had come to get my dad was because she had had a breakdown, and they thought that it would be good if she met the dad, because they felt that was stemming to it. So she says to me, she said, well, by that time we're being really honest with each other. And she said, well, Dad, mom said that Dad never claimed you. And so the next day I'm dressing to get ready for the funeral, and I'm thinking, gosh, God, if Dad never claimed me, and am I his? And is this a joke of all these brothers and sisters I've just met that maybe aren't even mine? And so she said, and then God said, you're my daughter. Doesn't matter whose dad you are, what dad you are.
What I find profound is that Jesus made a way for you to forgive your dad when he, I'm guessing, didn't even ask for forgiveness. And then he brought you a reconciliation of all your siblings, expanded your family, expanded the love that you didn't even know you had. But what I'm curious about is with your mom, how did that relationship progress? Did she ever ask for forgiveness for the way she wasn't able to be there for you and defend you and protect you as a little girl?
I can't say she's ever asked me for forgiveness, because I think, back in those days, they weren't thinking of things like that. And so she watched me change. She watched me transform. And so to her, it was my doings that I got straight. And it was. It was God's doings. But as I got healing, as I was able to connect with God, as far as He was in my story all along, and He had a big plan. I had a breakdown and really struggled with lots of things during that time. And so I realized He had a plan. I didn't know what the plan was. And so when I could recognize how angry I was and recognize what was really going on inside of me, like, where were you, Mom? Why weren't you there? Then God began to reach down and give me a heart for my mom. And so when she was 80, I was able to free myself from the fact that she couldn't offer me what I wanted, but God had offered me what I wanted, what I needed. And he had kind of, I can't say he erased, but he gave me a love for her that was tender, without blame. There was, up until the time she was 80, I just hated the thought of going over there. I hated the thought of what the atmosphere would be. And so I really, once God could heal my inner self and my anger at my mom, then I felt that she didn't die till she was 98. And so God gave me those years with her, of being able to be tender with her and loving with her. I can't say she ever said, I'm sorry, but she would say things like, you've done with your kids what I couldn't do with y'all. And I had to just accept. That wasn't oh, I'm so sorry for this and I wish I had done this. But she was saying it in a way, and I know that's because God had cleared my heart that I could hear it in the way God could give it to me and be okay with it. And so I was very thankful for that at the end of our lives, that her life, that we could be connected. I took care of her. I didn't, I didn't resent taking care of her, and so he had done it in his way, not my way, but he had done it.
It's so interesting that, in our culture, childhood is considered 18 years. And the Lord, at the end of her life, gave you 18 years
Yes.
of tender connection with your mama
Yes.
that you missed out on in
Yes.
childhood.
Yes.
And how beautiful is that?
Yeah.
It like gives us hope.
Yeah.
So if you could go back in time and talk to little 5-year-old Pat, what would you tell her that she needed to know that nobody was telling her?
Number one, that she was loved and accepted just the way she was. That I didn't have to do a major change, but that he loved me and cuddled me. And at one point in my life, God was working at learning how to let God embrace me and how to embrace God back. And so it was when it really connected of what that little girl deserved was when I got my own grandkids, great grandkids, or grandkids. And so I could see how much I loved them and how I would never, ever want to do that to them. And I would never want their parents to do that with them. And so I was able to kind of watch what a child should receive. And at that point, I actually could then fully let God embrace me and love me as I am, no matter who I am, no matter what I'm doing, that love would never stop. And I realized I was able to give that to my kids, and I was able to give that to my grandkids. And that's when I really identified, that is what you missed, but this is what I'm giving you. And so.
That's a miracle.
Yes.
That, the neglect, the abuse, the rejection and abandonment, it ended with you.
Yes.
And the Lord gave you a good inheritance to give your children and your grandchildren. And I think that's what we're all craving. What we all want is to know that it's not too late.
Right.
So what would you say to someone who's like, I'm 50 years old, or I'm 70 years old and I still have anger, or I'm still feeling ashamed because of, pain and rejection? What would you say?
I would say it's never too late. It's just never. I always thought it was too late. And so I was 50 years old before God, and I had had a great relationship with God from 28 until then, and thought I was fine. But at 50, I was asked to go to a conference and just to check it out because the church was thinking about bringing it to our church. And in that, I found out that I felt very abandoned, and I realized I still could get that feeling. And God said, well, what you haven't dealt with, you have dealt with knowing that I love you, and that's all that matters. But at 50 years old, I had to realize that I had effects from that I had brought with me. So that was why certain things would get hit, a trigger would get hit if somebody, like if I felt Perry wasn't there or whatever. And so there was something still there. And so I started looking into the damage of those years that I still had that I wanted to get rid of. And it wasn't too late at 50. And I am so thankful that I never thought you needed to do that. And what God said to me is, that little girl that was always abandoned? Well, when you came to know the Lord, you left her behind. You don't want to talk about her. You don't want to discuss her. You don't want to talk about those years. You're just over here loving God. but she's still over here, and she's waiting for you to come and embrace her and love her and bring her back to life. And so that's what I've done, and that's where the real freedom has come. I'm not saying I didn't have freedom before, but the freedom from past wounds have been looked at and nurtured and loved on, and I've had people around me that could love me through it, which is one being you. And God has been so faithful to teach me that there are effects to damage, but God can heal, because that's why he went to the cross. He came to set us fully free, not partially free.
Amen to that.
Yeah.
So for anyone listening who resonates with any part of Pat's story and wants the same freedom that you've gained, would you just speak a prayer blessing over them?
Sure.
Yeah.
So Father God, I'm just in awe of your freedom that you offer us through the cross. I thank you, Jesus, that for those that are out there that still have those lingering triggers or the lingering wounds that they don't understand and can't understand why they can't forgive, or they can't do this or they can't do that. Father, there is hope and freedom in Jesus Christ. And Father, you died on the cross for everything, every wound, every sin, everything about us, because you want to offer us not just freedom in heaven, but freedom here to love others, to get them to heaven. That's how I see it. And so, Father, I just thank you, and I thank you there's hope in you alone. And I pray, God, that if there's anybody out there that is struggling with anything in their life, that they will have the courage to go and seek out people that can help them heal in that area, and not be satisfied with just halfway, but that they get the fullness of you. In Jesus' name.
During our next episode of Embracing God's Love, Pat will be sharing all about marriage and what it looks like to have Jesus come in and restore what you don't believe can be restored. Like, he did a miracle in you and your husband, Perry.
Yes, he did.
I'm so proud of you. Thank you for sharing today, and we'll talk to you guys next time.